Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we take your curiosity and sharpen it into insight. Today, we're plunging into a powerful, compact, and I think profoundly challenging piece of scripture, Isaiah chapter 16. This chapter isn't a standalone historical anecdote. It actually continues the prophetic oracle, or the burden, against the wealthy and proud nation of Moab.
And it is so much more than just an ancient regional warning. This text is a masterclass. It's a masterclass in the theology of divine justice, but also compassion. It demonstrates precisely why human pride leads to catastrophic ruin, what genuine refuge actually entails, and ultimately it points us toward the only king who governs with absolute integrity.
And the dynamics you see here, economic collapse, mass displacement, the silencing of a successful, self-congratulatory culture, they feel terrifyingly modern.
They really do.
So our mission today is a comprehensive, verse-by-verse forensic analysis of this short passage. We're going to systematically unpack the prophecy against Moab's spectacular material wealth and its inherent spiritual pride. We'll trace the unseen spiritual dynamics at play and find out exactly how a text about destroyed vineyards in the ancient Near East gives us a roadmap for understanding the fragilities of our modern, affluent lifestyles.
Okay, let's unpack this. Chapter 16 is constructed with really architectural precision. It details three key movements that shift the focus from an immediate geopolitical crisis to, an eternal hope. First, you have the appeal for ethical mercy and physical refuge.
Okay.
Second, the scathing, relentless indictment of Moab's pride. And then finally, the definitive time-stamped judgment. The prophet doesn't just report the news. He skillfully weaves this vision of immediate catastrophe into an enduring promise of ultimate righteous governance.
And that theological pivot right there, from panicked refugees to the establishment of the eternal Davidic throne, that is precisely what makes this chapter so vital. We begin, though, right in the middle of chaos. Complete chaos.
We open with a highly charged moment. It's diplomatic maneuvering mixed with genuine distress. Moab, which has historically been an antagonist toward Israel and Judah, is suddenly advised to turn toward the Mount of Zion for help.
Right, and that first verse acts as this urgent piece of counsel directed at Moab's leadership. It says, "Send the lamb to the ruler of the land."
Send the lamb?
Moab is being advised to send tribute, specifically lambs, from a place called Selah across the desert to the Mount of the Daughter of Zion, which is Jerusalem.
So what's the deep significance of this? It sounds like a simple diplomatic act, sending a flock of sheep.
It is so much more than that. It's a profound admission of failure.
An admission of failure? How so?
It's an urgent political and spiritual recalibration. It signals that Moab's boasted self-reliance has utterly failed against this encroaching imperial power, which was, most likely Assyria.
And the reference to lambs? That isn't arbitrary, is it?
Far from it. Lambs symbolize tribute. They symbolize material wealth. And this is deeply, deeply rooted in Moabite history. Right, I'm thinking of 2 Kings 3.4.
Exactly. We know from sources like that King Mesha of Moab, the very king whose revolt is recorded on the famous Mesha stela, he paid an enormous tribute to Israel. It was 100,000 lambs and the wool of 100,000 rams.
An incredible amount. So Isaiah is telling Moab to... what? Resume this payment?
Yes. Resume this type of payment, but now to the king of Judah, the designated ruler of the land.
So this isn't just about asking for charity. This is an attempt to buy protection through an acknowledged historical vassal relationship. But now it's centered on the throne in Jerusalem.
Precisely. The act of sending the tribute is meant to signal submission. It's about seeking alignment with God's chosen people and asking for asylum under his appointed king. It's a spiritual lesson wrapped in a political demand.
So they're being told, essentially, your protection isn't in your own strength or your God Shemesh.
Right. It's in humbling yourself and acknowledging where true God-ordained authority actually rests.
And the geography here seems key to understanding the sheer desperation of it all. They're sending this tribute from Selah. Why Selah? What is that place?
Selah literally means rock or cliff in Hebrew. It was a massive, virtually impregnable fortress city, often associated with the Edomite or Arabian borderlands to the south of Moab.
So way out there.
Way out there. The fact that the appeal originates there suggests that the Moabite refugees and what's left of their government have already fled their original strongholds. They've run to the rugged, inhospitable terrain of the deep south. They're already in flight.
So they're seeking safety even among traditional rivals like the Edomites.
Yes, only to realize that even the mighty rock of Selah offers no ultimate refuge. Their last hope, their last-ditch effort must be Zion.
Wow. And the image in verse 2, it just drives home this utter failure of Moab's self-reliance. It paints this heartbreaking picture of displacement. Daughters of Moab at the fords of the Arnon, like wandering birds cast out of the nest.
That metaphor is chillingly powerful, isn't it? The Arnon River constitutes Moab's crucial northern border. It's a natural choke point.
A place you'd have to cross to escape.
Exactly. And the daughters of Moab. This represents the families, the women, the most vulnerable populations, and symbolically, the cities themselves. They're depicted as helpless, scattered nestlings who've been pushed from the nest. They can't fly, they can't return, and they are utterly exposed.
So we're looking at complete panic. This is a total social and political collapse. It's the absolute antithesis of the pride and stability that Moab was famous for.
Precisely. This image of being a wandering bird cast out of the nest emphasizes rootlessness, profound insecurity, and exposure to the spoiler, that destructive military force. This is the direct consequence of national pride. It's a complete reversal of security, where the fortified nation is reduced to fluttering, exposed hatchlings at a desolate border crossing.
That contrast between the fortress of Selah and the fluttering vulnerability at the Arnon, it's just a masterstroke of prophetic irony.
It truly is.
So after detailing this scene of national distress, the prophet shifts the instruction and the focus to Judah, or really to any neighboring power. He demands this radical compassion. Verses 3 and 4 lay out a powerful humanitarian mandate. Counsel, execute judgment, make thy shadow as the night in the midst of the noonday. Hide the outcasts, betray not him that wandereth. This just seems politically impossible, extending that kind of grace to a historical enemy.
This is where the ethical demand just transcends realpolitik. The striking metaphor, make thy shadow as the night in the midst of the noonday, is a plea for supernatural or extraordinary protection.
What does that mean, practically?
Well, think about the physical reality. At high noon, the heat is blistering, shadows are minimal, and visibility is at its maximum. It's a terrible time to be exposed if you're a refugee.
The worst time.
The worst. So this demand is asking for a deep, dark covert or refuge that defies natural circumstances. It's asking for absolute, total concealment and relief when the vulnerability is at its highest.
So it sets up a standard of mercy, or cheesed, that challenges Judah's nationalist self-interest. They're being tested, aren't they? Will they shelter the outcasts, the Moabites, until the extortioner and spoiler, the invading empire, are consumed?
Yes, it establishes a profound ethical demand for humanitarian compassion, even toward traditional enemies. Because this act of providing asylum, of hiding the outcasts, it's a spiritual counterforce against the powers of oppression. And look at the language. The prophet says, "Let mine outcasts dwell with thee, Moab."
Mine outcasts. So God is claiming them.
Yes. This suggests that even these outcasts are under a divine mandate for protection. And the expectation is not just for transit, but for actual settlement and integration within Judah's borders.
That makes the shift in verse 5 even more dramatic, because the ethical plea for temporary shelter is immediately elevated by the introduction of an eternal solution. And in mercy shall the throne be established, and he shall sit upon it in truth in the tabernacle of David. Why pivot so abruptly from chaotic refugee camps to the promise of a perfect, eternal ruler?
This is the theological hinge of the entire chapter. This is the typological, the messianic aspect. The prophet is telling these desperate people who are seeking temporary safety under the fragile protection of an earthly king. He's saying, stop looking at the momentary crisis, look at the ultimate ruler who is coming. What's fascinating here is that the immediate geopolitical chaos, the destruction of Moab, the temporary relief sought from Zion, it's all fundamentally linked to a future perfect sovereign.
So the stability the Moabites are hoping to find in Judah's king is just a fragile type, a fleeting shadow of the real thing.
Precisely. The promised Davidic king contrasts starkly with the failed elites of Moab and the destructive invading forces. This ruler will establish a throne based on sheezed nin, that steadfast love, covenant faithfulness, and mercy. And he'll govern with him at truth and faithfulness. And he will be swift in righteousness, actively pursuing and executing justice.
Let's expand on that phrase, the tabernacle of David. It's not referring to a physical tent, is it?
No, absolutely not. That phrase, tabernacle of David, it evokes the royal household, the dynasty promised to David in 2 Samuel 7.
The Davidic covenant.
Exactly. It signifies the legitimate, reliable kingship that God established. In the midst of the chaos of the divided kingdoms and the threat of invasion, Isaiah points to the permanence of God's promise.
And its fulfillment, where do we see that?
Well, while godly kings like Hezekiah may have partially embodied this ideal, the passage ultimately points to Jesus Christ. He is the one who establishes a kingdom based on cheese and emet, governing with perfect equity. This vision of ultimate, reliable, love-anchored governance is the hope that ends all oppression.
And the New Testament picks up on this.
It does. James references the rebuilding of the tabernacle of David in Acts 15. He uses it to signify the inclusion of the Gentiles and the reestablishment of Christ's spiritual kingdom, which is ultimately one of justice and mercy for all nations. You see, the stability of Moab's fortress pales in comparison to the eternal stability of this throne.
So, if the Moabites had truly understood this verse, they would have realized that true refuge wasn't just geographical asylum in Jerusalem, it was submission to the eternal king represented by the Davidic line. Which brings us to why they needed this mercy in the first place, their fatal spiritual flaw.
Right. We transition now from the offer of salvation, the shade and the secure throne, to the reason why salvation was required. And that reason is the overwhelming systemic sin of Moab.
Verse 6 is just relentless. It uses this accumulation of terms to drive the point home. We have heard of the pride of Moab. He is very proud, even of his haughtiness and his pride and his wrath, but his lies shall not be so. Why this five-fold repetition? Pride, arrogance, conceit, insolence, wrath, and lies. Why is the prophet so emphatic about this single-root sin?
The repetition is a prophetic hammer blow. It uses various Hebrew synonyms, especially the word gaon, which can mean majesty or exaltation. It's often used for God's glory, but here it's corrupted. It's to underscore that pride is Moab's foundational endemic spiritual flaw. It's the direct cause of their judgment.
So this isn't just a national trait, it's a full-blown national arrogance.
It is. It's the belief that their material success, their military strength light, their fortress Haraseth, and their religion, the worship of Chemosh, rendered them independent, self-sufficient, and superior to everyone, including God.
It's practical idolatry, then. The nation is worshiping its own output and its self-generated success.
Exactly. Pride is treated as a corrosive spiritual force. It's the desire for autonomy from the Creator. And it's the spiritual blindness that prevents them from seeking the shadow of Zion in the first place. They looked at their vast vineyards, their fortifications, their bank accounts, and they concluded they needed no one.
So this spiritual posture of self-glory is what fundamentally repels the mercy that was just offered in the preceding verses.
It is. And that final phrase, his lies shall not be so, or more literally, his boasts are empty, reveals the hollowness of their self-confidence. Their rhetoric, their national story, just doesn't match the reality the prophet sees coming.
So the judgment that follows is simply the spiritual law of gravity asserting itself. Their pride set their destiny.
Absolutely. And that pride manifested outwardly as scorn and wrath toward others, especially Israel and Judah, which contributed to their judgment. They had their opportunity for submission and shelter in verse 1, but their pervasive pride meant their frantic attempts at reconciliation were purely political maneuvers.
Born of desperation, not a surrender of the heart.
Exactly.
And the detailed consequences of this pride are seen in verse 7. Therefore shall Moab howl for Moab, mourn for the foundations of Kir-Hareseth, for the raisin cakes. Okay, this detail always jumps out at me. We mourn the foundations of a mighty fortress alongside mourning raisin cakes.
That's a brilliant prophetic technique, isn't it? It connects national pride to material culture and cultural loss. It shows that judgment is total. It touches both the sacred and the profane aspects of life.
So he focuses on two symbolic extremes.
Yes. Kir-Hareseth was the fortified capital, the ultimate symbol of military security. Its foundations being stricken means the very bedrock of their invincibility is removed.
The ultimate structure of security is shown to be a facade.
Yes. And then you have the raisin cakes, often translated as flagons or fine fruit cakes made from pressed dried grapes. They represent the opposite extreme. They were prized delicacies, symbols of Moab's abundant prosperity, their feasting, their lavish celebratory culture that their wealth afforded.
So not just food, but a cultural symbol.
A huge cultural symbol. And furthermore, historical sources suggest such fruitcakes were often used in pagan fertility worship, like we see in Hosea 3.1. So it connects them directly to their religious corruption and the worship of Chemosh.
So the mourning is for the loss of both military security and the abundant, festive, and spiritually corrupt culture that fed their arrogance.
Exactly. It's the total dismantling of their civilization.
Yeah.
The things they ate, the festivals they celebrated, and the places they used for security, all gone. The howls of national lamentation replaced their customary communal joy.
It's a powerful lesson. Pride rooted in material and cultural abundance results in the loss of the very things a society prizes most.
Yes, it's theological insight. God judges the source of their boasting.
Which brings us to the next section, where Isaiah details the systematic removal of that very wealth and joy.
Right. Building on the indictment of pride, this section now provides a vivid, systematic depiction of the physical, economic destruction. This is the total, unrecoverable removal of Moab's wealth, which was the literal engine of their arrogance.
Moab's economy, as we've established, was famously tied to agriculture, especially its vineyards. Verse 8 details this catastrophe. The fields of Heshbon Lachish and the vine of Sibmah, the lords of the heathen have broken down the principal plants thereof. How thorough is the economic destruction described here?
The description paints a picture of total, deliberate economic collapse. Heshbon and Sibmah were two names that were legendary throughout the ancient Near East, specifically for the quality and abundance of their vineyards.
And in biblical culture, the vine is often a symbol of
What?
national fertility.
Blessing? All of the above. Blessing, covenantal well-being. The prophet emphasizes that these were not just local crops. These vines were so successful and luxuriant that they reached Jazer and even passed over the sea or strayed to the desert.
That suggests massive international trade and widespread commercial prosperity. They were pushing their cultivation limits to the extreme. Their economic success really defined them on the global stage.
Precisely. They were major exporters. Their economic power was the source of their security and their pride. But now, the lords of the heathen, the invading army, the instrument of judgment, they haven't just harvested the fruit. They have systematically trampled and broken down the principal plants, the choice vines, the soric or noble varieties.
So this is an explicit prophecy of the systematic removal of their material wealth. It guarantees that recovery will not be swift or easy.
Not at all. And crucially, the destruction extends beyond the physical crops to the cultural experience itself. This is the silence described in verses 9 and 10.
Right. Gladness is taken away, and joy out of the plentiful field. In the vineyards there shall be no singing, neither shall there be shouting. I have made their vintage shouting to cease.
This is the death knell of their culture. The ancient harvest was a communal, joyous ritual. The shouting, Hadad, and the rhythmic singing associated with the treading out of grapes in the winepress. These were loud, pervasive sounds of national vitality, of satisfaction and success.
You can almost hear it. Imagine the sound of 20 or 30 people stomping grapes in a stone press, singing and shouting rhythmically. That noise would have symbolized life and abundance.
Exactly. And now that sound is replaced by an unnatural, deadening silence.
God states, I have made their vintage shouting to cease.
Yes. The judgment isn't just economic, it's psychological and spiritual. The celebration is over. The social defeat that accompanies the economic shock is profound. It's the loss of cultural ritual, of communal joy, and the sense of security that abundance provided. It is the sound of a truly desolate land.
And in the midst of this sterile description of desolation, we encounter one of the most powerful emotional responses in prophecy, Isaiah's intense, personal, visceral grief. He says, I will water thee with my tears, O Heshbon and Elealeh, wherefore my bowels shall sound like an harp for Moab, and mine inwards parts for Kir hairs. Why does the prophet, speaking on behalf of God, lament so deeply for an enemy nation that is being judged?
This is so profoundly theological. It reflects God's own pathos and compassion, even in executing righteous judgment. The prophet's heart is groaning like a lyre or harp-lamenting musical instrument. And his inner parts, the mei or bowels, which in ancient understanding was the deepest seat of emotions, they're struck with sympathy for Moab's ruin.
It ensures the reader can't take any satisfaction in the downfall of the proud.
Precisely. The judgment is seen not as vengeance, but as a holy necessity executed with profound sorrow. Isaiah models the broken-hearted attitude believers should have toward the wicked or the lost. It confirms that God grieves over the consequences of human sin.
So the judgment is unavoidable because of Moab's pride. But it is not administered with glee.
Not at all. It's a powerful statement of divine mercy balancing divine justice. The weeping prophet demonstrates that the ultimate enemy is the sin itself, not the people enslaved to it.
Which brings us to the final section, where the prophet addresses Moab's last, desperate spiritual response to the crisis.
Yes, and then he seals the prophecy with an undeniable timeline.
So when facing imminent destruction, Moab, in its frenzy, instinctively doubles down on its religious practice. Verse 12 describes them going to their high places in sanctuary, but the effort is futile. When Moab presents himself on the high place to pray, but he shall not prevail, The text suggests they are simply wearing themselves out.
And that is a devastating critique of ritual without righteousness. Moab's high places were elevated sites for the fervent worship of their national deity, Chemosh. In times of crisis, pagan worship often involved frenzied, desperate activity sacrifice, ritual exhaustion, even self-mutilation, as we see sometimes described in 1 Kings 18.
So all this strenuous human effort in worship is utterly futile against the judgment of the one true God. They are exhausting themselves in desperate religious busywork that cannot and will not save them.
That's the core spiritual interaction here. Instead of humbling themselves and accepting the counsel and shelter offered by Zion in the first verses, they chose to expend energy on their own methods of security. It illustrates the impotence of false gods, and that sheer human effort, even in religious context, cannot avert divine judgment when fundamental pride and rebellion persist.
So they are seeking refuge in the wrong place, under a false shadow.
Exactly. It contrasts sharply with the true refuge offered in verse 5. Rest under the Davidic throne established and cheesed. Religious ceremony becomes meaningless and wearisome when divorced from humility, justice, and dependence on the true sovereign.
And then the chapter ends, not just with this general warning, but with a remarkably precise, actionable deadline in verse 14. Why the emphasis on 3 years and as the years of an hireling?
This time-bound prediction is crucial. It conveys absolute urgency, certainty, and God's sovereignty over history. A hired worker, a hireling or mercenary, had a fixed short-term contract, and they counted those days precisely until their obligation was complete. Isaiah is saying Moab's time is measured precisely down to the calendar day, and it is running out rapidly.
So that specificity serves 2 purposes. It validates the prophet, and it acts as a final, concrete warning.
Exactly. Historically, this timeline was highly likely fulfilled by the campaigns of the Assyrian Emperor Sargon II, perhaps around 715 BC. He conducted major operations that annexed and subjugated several nations in the Transjordan region, including Moab, to maintain Assyrian control. That specificity underscored the reliability of God's word, proving Isaiah to be a true prophet.
And the outcome is total humiliation, not just destruction.
The glory of Moab, their pride, their abundance, their multitude will be brought into contempt. Despised, utterly stripped away. The judgment isn't total extinction. It is a complete reversal of status. The outcome is defined clearly. The remnant shall be very small and feeble.
They survive, but without significance, influence, power, or vitality.
Yes, the splendor of the once proud kingdom is punctured, leaving behind only a few shuffling people lacking any national coherence, the complete opposite of their former glory.
We've established the historical context, the economic collapse, and the prophetic timeline. Now let's peel back the curtain further and discuss the unseen spiritual forces Isaiah reveals are truly driving these physical events.
Right, because the destruction of the noble vineyards, the scattering of the people, the failure of the fortresses, these are not just random geopolitical events orchestrated by Assyria. They are the result of God's sovereignty, operating according to profound spiritual laws.
And the primary spiritual law, as you identified earlier, is the role of pride as a form of spiritual rebellion.
Yes. Moab's systemic arrogance, that gone, is a fundamental spiritual posture that directly opposes the Creator. It's the spiritual error of self-reliance, which is a form of functional atheism, believing one can be independent of God. And this pride leads to spiritual blindness, making them unable to accept the mercy offered. Their reliance on Chemosh and their high places, which proved utterly powerless, reveals the depth of that blindness.
And the judgment itself is a divine mechanism.
It is. The timeline, the 3 years, suggests divine patience giving way to a released, predetermined judgment. The Assyrians were merely instruments in a larger divine calendar, fulfilling God's purposes, even unknowingly. The prophet demonstrates that God maintains absolute sovereignty over all geopolitical actors.
And what about the figures of the oppressor and spoiler in verse 4?
They personify the spiritual forces of tyranny and devastation that flourish when God's covenantal morality is rejected. They are the inevitable result of a world operating on pride.
And that complexity justice executed with mercy connects directly back to the ethical command to shelter the outcasts.
It connects everything. The command to shelter the outcasts is a spiritual act that resists the forces of oppression and aligns with God's core nature, cheesed. It demonstrates the character of the kingdom promised in verse 5. True spiritual alignment is demonstrated by acting justly and mercifully, even toward those who traditionally oppose you.
So Isaiah 16 acts as a prophetic lighthouse, guiding us toward greater truths. What are the key typologies and prophecies that extend beyond Moab's immediate crisis?
Well, the anchor of the entire chapter is the throne of David in verse 5. This typological statement points beyond any earthly monarch, whether a short-lived Moabite king or a temporary Judean king, to the Messiah, Jesus Christ. His rule is established not by military conquest or economic might, but in perfect, steadfast love, cheesed, and justice, tzedek. His governance is the eternal refuge.
So we have the fulfillment that has already occurred and the ultimate fulfillment yet to come.
Exactly. The near-term judgment, the 3 years, and the subsequent decimation of Moab's population and economy were historically fulfilled. That confirms Isaiah's authority. The destruction of Heshbon and Sibma's agricultural wealth is a documented historical fact of the Assyrian expansion.
And the prophecies still awaiting fulfillment.
Those solidify the messianic horizon. The ultimate defeat of the oppressor and spoiler points to Christ's final victory over all evil and tyrannical powers and the full establishment of the eternal kingdom of righteousness. And some interpreters even suggest that the command to shelter the outcasts in verse 3 is a veiled end times prophecy.
Oh, so?
They suggest that the geographical region of Moab, which is modern-day Jordan, may serve as a secure place of refuge for the Jewish people fleeing persecution during the end times. It seems to be protected from the final invasions referenced elsewhere in prophecy.
That's fascinating. And let's revisit the core metaphors. The wandering bird and the vineyard.
The wandering bird typology represents human vulnerability, displacement, and exposure when apart from God's protection. It's a timeless image of fear and rootlessness. And the vineyard destruction is a potent foreshadowing of spiritual barrenness. It illustrates the inevitable judgment that follows when a people's trust is misplaced in their own material fruitfulness rather than the true source of blessing. The resulting silence is the spiritual barrenness of a soul without the shelter of Zion.
It is so tempting to just consign Moab to the archives of history, but the challenge of the text is to find the contemporary echoes. How does this chapter compare to our modern nations and lifestyles, particularly those defined by material abundance and technological hubris?
We see striking, even unnerving parallels. Like Moab's pride rooted in its vineyards and the fortress of Kir-Hareseth, modern nations and individuals often define their identity and security based on economic strength, technological dominance, and a pervasive consumer culture. We trust deeply in the foundations of complex financial markets, global supply chains, military strength, and endless technological innovation. It's a mirror of Moab's self-sufficiency.
So our modern Kir-Hareseth isn't a stone fortress. It's the security derived from global defense pacts or a dominant currency. And the modern raisin cakes, what are they?
Modern raisin cakes are our sophisticated luxuries. They are the gadgets, the designer brands, the endless entertainment options, and the cultural confidence we derive from them.
Moab's vines were so prosperous they stretched over the sea. Our technology reaches the far corners of the globe, exporting our culture and commerce everywhere. The pride is identical, the belief that our ingenuity and wealth make us immune to collapse. We suffer from wealth idolatry, where GDP growth becomes the ultimate measurement of national virtue.
What about the profound sense of anxiety and cultural emptiness we see in so many affluent societies? That must be the modern silencing of joy.
Absolutely. We experience a paradox where material abundance, the biggest harvest in history, fails to deliver lasting hedad, lasting joy. The widespread anxiety, the mental health crisis, and the cultural lamentation we observe in the most affluent societies, that is the silencing of the harvest shout. Our material success hasn't brought genuine, enduring happiness, proving that security rooted in possessions is ultimately fragile.
And the loss of meaningful communal ritual, replaced by isolated consumption, mirrors the cultural death of Moab.
It does, and Moab's frantic ritualism at the high places. Modern people are equally busy trying to avert crisis. Modern lifestyles often involve wearing ourselves out, as verse 12 says, through endless self-improvement programs, religious busy work, relentless political activism, or striving for social validation. All of these act as modern high places.
Any effort we expend seeking ultimate meaning or security in a place other than the Davidic king.
Exactly. Whether it's career success, fitness regimes, or intellectual achievement, it becomes a form of strenuous religious activity that ultimately cannot prevail against existential emptiness or moral consequence.
And the ethical call to shelter the outcasts speaks directly to our globalized reality.
It challenges us fundamentally. The humanitarian demand to provide shade at noon addresses contemporary global refugee crises and mass displacement. It challenges individuals and wealthy nations on their ethical obligation to extend cheese and provide refuge to vulnerable people, regardless of political expediency. We are commanded to be a sanctuary of mercy, even to those we might perceive as other or antagonistic, because that act of mercy reflects the character of the secure Davidic throne.
So Isaiah 16 transitions from a historical case study into a direct spiritual challenge and a promise for the believer. Let's start with the immediate warning against pride and materialism.
This raises an important question for personal reflection. Where do you place your ultimate trust? Moab warns us that pride, even subtle spiritual pride disguised as self-reliance, is spiritually corrosive and invites severe correction. We must resist the temptation to let material abundance breed self-sufficiency, lest our own personal glory, our status, wealth, or achievements be brought to contempt. Reliance on volatile assets, career success, or even personal intellect instead of God is repeating Moab's fundamental error, worshiping the output rather than the source.
The teaching moment on justice and mercy is also crystal clear in the counsel given to Judah.
It is. The chapter teaches the active nature of God's justice and the ethical imperative to show compassion. It's a call for believers to embody the shade, to practice shade-making mercy, and be a sanctuary of compassion to the vulnerable. It tells us that worship must be inextricably linked to justice. Fervent ritual cannot substitute for ethical practice, especially toward the oppressed. We must be agents of God's cheese.
And finally, the encouragement and help from the secure throne provides the anchor for hope.
Despite the absolute chaos detailed throughout the world, the failure of economic foundations, the silencing of cultural joy, the Davidic throne in verse 5 is immovably established in steadfast love and truth. This is the ultimate source of security. Our security is not in fragile earthly abundance, which, like Moab's vines, can be trampled in 3 years. Our ultimate security is in the unshakable King, Jesus Christ. He judges justly, provides eternal refuge, and his governance will never fail. This assurance encourages the feeble remnant, the scattered believers, to persevere, knowing their King is faithful and their security is absolute.
We've charted Moab's trajectory from arrogant prosperity, defined by its noble vines and mighty fortress, to utter desolation, all dictated by a prophetic clock set to exactly 3 years.
And through that historical trajectory, we gain timeless insight. Every nation, every institution, and every heart built on pride and self-reliance stands on inherently shaky foundations. Yet in the midst of that inevitable collapse, Isaiah points us toward the only enduring government, a throne established in perfect mercy and truth, which alone can withstand the spoiler.
Our deep dive into Isaiah 16 has shown us that the true measure of a society, or an individual life, is not the height of their prosperity, but the depth of their humility, and the kindness of the shade they offer to those in distress.
So what does this all mean for you as you navigate a world that places its trust in fragile foundations? The prophecy was precise, the judgment was certain, and the king is coming. The only question left is, will you choose to seek shelter under the only shadow that turns the height of the oppressive noonday into restful night, knowing that only that righteous king can truly silence the spoiler and restore true, lasting joy?
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. Go explore and let this knowledge shape your understanding.